taking first cut. Golly. Welcome to the First Cup Podcast. I'm Rick Gehman, and this is your Ryder Cup debrief. Joining me to break it all down, we are mostly back from Italy. Mark Immelman is here. Mark, good to see you.
Nice to see you, Rick. Normally you're the guy I'm the guy who's in the hotel room. Now you are. This is good to see.
I'm stuck in London for the moment. Kyle Porter is here. KP, hey, bud.
At least you speak the language there, right? Like I got stuck in some places in Italy that I was like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know. It gave me I think it gave me a greater appreciation for people that travel a ton, and it's super fun. I mean, we can get into it. It's a trip of a lifetime, but it's different. It's a different thing to travel internationally.
So we were talking about it because what happened was, the short version is we were flying from Venice to London to LAX. We got to London. The British Airways captain puffed out his chest. He got us there 10 minutes early. He was proud as could be. He was peacocking. There was no gate for us. Then we went to another gate where the plane had a mechanical issue, so that wasn't moving. We went to another gate where there was nobody there. We sat on the runway for like 2 hours and missed our connection after getting there early and then being very proud of it.
Was he still peacocking or?
No, he was apologizing pretty liberally by the end.
This is like Mark when he's got the 36-hole leader in his bets, and then by Sunday he's like, "I'm sorry, guys, I shouldn't have said that."
It was a real like mission accomplished moment for that captain. And then my point being, Kyle, like, thank God our connection wasn't through like Munich or somewhere that we would be up a creek if we were in like a non-English speaking country right now.
Yeah. I mean, what was, I'll throw it back to you on this. Like, what was you've been in Italy for almost 2 weeks, or I guess probably 2 weeks now. What has been your experience and just kind of your takeaways from, I mean, everybody was joking over there about like the bus schedule and like the shuttles to the course, and like, it was humorous that they're like, yeah, we're good. We're not driving anymore today. It's like their culture is just, I loved it and I was fascinated by it, but I was curious about what your takeaways have been.
Yeah, it's obviously incredibly different, and the things that you would expect or not expect, like I found a lot of it to be opposite of what I deal with on a daily basis. But I was just telling Mark that, like, Italy as a whole, it's really impossible to recreate a lot of stuff that you can see in Italy and in Europe in America, just because of how old everything is. Mm-hmm. And these towns that are literally 1,000 years old, 1,000+ years old, that are built into the sides of these cliffs, and how they figured out how. I mean, we went to Venice, and I mean there's 300 bridges in Venice. There's these canals everywhere, and how they bring in, like, there's a trash boat, right? So we had to take our trash down to the trash boat. They wheel it around, and then you put it on the boat. They drive it out. Like, I couldn't even imagine how they came up with everything to get around all of that.
But that trash boat, you got to sort out your biological stuff from your plastic, from your paper. It's a mission to do the trash in Italy, especially in Venice, but it is cool.
Yeah, there's just so much like that, KP, that I mean, America is like an infant in all of this, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of stuff that we didn't have to figure out over the last couple of 1,000 years that they have had to do.
I think what stood out to me, Rick, is they're both a lot more chill and a lot less chill than we are, right? Yeah. Where I was in the airport on flying out on Tuesday out of Rome, and they're very direct to one another, which I find to be kind of refreshing. Like, this person was standing in an area of the little bakery in the airport that he wasn't supposed to be, and the guy was like, hey, he said it, I think he was speaking Italian. He was like, could you move? And the guy was like, why? And I was like, wow, this would, like, imagine that happening in, Atlanta or Miami, just like an American city. It's just, it wouldn't happen. But they're a lot more chill in that. I mean, we walked around, me and a couple of guys walked around Rome for like 10 hours on Monday after the Ryder Cup. And it was like 6 p.m. and we couldn't find a place that was serving dinner because they were like, yeah, we're not going to do dinner until like 8 or whatever, you know. And one night we stayed up until like 12:30 a.m. eating dinner, and it, like, I find that pretty awesome as well. So it was a really fun and cool cultural experience, and one that yeah, I was very grateful to have had.
Yeah, it was stellar stuff. The golf specifically, Mark, was mostly one-sided. Obviously, the Europeans getting a 5-point victory to win back the Ryder Cup, and doing it in a fashion where, yes, there was that window on Sunday where there was a pathway to hope, but the outcome, statistically, based on probability, based on reality, the outcome of the Ryder Cup was decided fairly early in the week and was not really in jeopardy throughout.
Golly, Rick, I mean, you talk about statements. I remember Friday morning being out there, and in the opening match, Victor Hovland and Lud Aberg, Victor chips in from behind the green to go one up. And it was like the writing was almost on the wall already after that, because in match 2, they grab an early lead. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at this. And remember, I'm over there on a corporate engagement, and I have an American organization in PepsiCo, and they started to ask, so what do you think? And I'm like, golly, were the crowds behind these folks? Because the more they went up, the more the crowds got rampant, the more that sort of lifted the Europeans. And they were, some of them were like superhuman at some stage. But I just think the whole thing from how the golf course was set up, because to me it was kind of American style, with the bunkering and the undulation, because a lot of European courses are flatter with smaller greens. But this place looked like it was American when I first saw it. But then when I saw the chipping areas and I saw how the golf course played, and it's sort of like it was a masterclass by Luke Donald in setting up the place, picking players who were going to play well there. Because if you'd caught me prior to the week, I would have said, Bob McIntyre, I'm not so sure. But it's set up beautifully for him, and he played great. So the whole thing was just indicative to me of playing at home. And just something personal. You were speaking about Rome. I'd retire there tomorrow if I could, in Italy, that is. And to go to Rome, I did a MC deal, like a speaking engagement Thursday night. And I was just struck because this place was on top of a hill. It's overlooking the Eternal City, and you can see St. Peter's Basilica over there, and you look this way and you could see the Colosseum. It was just magnificent. And to have golf in this place, and to watch a sport that I read was the 17th most popular sport in the country, just suddenly get front and center, for 3 days. It was like all the Euro fans that showed up and the Italian fans who were there. It became a thing. And there was this groundswell of support from my point of view that just lifted that team to heights that I knew they were capable, but I certainly didn't think it was possible.
Yeah, certainly rampant support for the European side, as you can imagine. But KP, it's been a couple of days, right? There's been debriefs. There's been the slow drip of news that's starting to come out, and quotes that are starting to come out, and the good stuff that's starting to come out. But when you look back now, a couple of days removed from this, what was the difference on the golf course, right? Why was this not even that competitive throughout?
Well,
for a team that, on paper a month ago was a big underdog, and even as this thing kicked off was a coin flip, and it was never close.
I mean, how much time do we have?
Go for it, buddy.
I'm stuck in a city with nothing to do.
First of all, can I get your opinion on something, Rick? Mark mentioned the golf course, and I sort of disagree that it was set up to the advantage of the Europeans, and I mostly disagree with that because I think both teams, we talked about this before in the lead up, right? Both teams kind of just play the same style. Like I don't. I guess if you catch enough guys that like play strictly on the European tour, you could kind of talk me into, well, that's like a different style than the PGA Tour. But I don't know that the golf course really affected that much of the outcome. Where do you land on that, Rick?
So I think the only thing I tend to agree with you, Kyle, in the sense that it is, there was not like necessarily an Ian Poulter on the team, right? A guy who's just going to be shorter than everybody else that is going to have to play out of the fairway. And the teams, by the time we got the final 24, were close-ish enough. At least the first 9 or 10 guys on both teams were close-ish enough in skill sets that a setup that was pretty standard, to Mark's point, like kind of a standard American golf course. I didn't think it generally favored one team over another. The only thing that I noticed, and even some of the European guys were struggling with this a little bit early, was the greens were slower than they would expect. Right? I don't know what the stimp was, but the greens, and listen, I'll speak to, like, I played it on Monday, very slow. Right, the greens were very slow. I was expecting just lightning fast. It wasn't anything like that. And you saw some of the guys adjust to it. That generally teeters a bit more like Euro style golf, but I don't think it was anything super drastic.
If I might add to that, the green speeds certainly were a thing, because I noticed countless Americans leaving putts short and low all the time throughout the week, which sort of spoke to preparation as well, because they went there a few weeks before the time and they knew it was going to be slow. Then you come there and you arrive, some of them on Sunday, a lot of them on Monday. You're going to make the adjustment. But when you're playing on super fast greens like the PGA Tour, that's inside of you. And you've got 15 feet downhill, and you've done this countless times on the tour. It's just hard to convince yourself to go and hit the thing hard, because it's habitual because of the speeds of the greens. I would add to that, where I think the real European flair came from, was those greens where a lot of them were perched with all these runoffs and stuff into places. So it brought into it the chip and run, the bump and run game, which is something we don't see that much on the PGA Tour, because the greens are faster over here. You got to hit shots with more spin, more loft. And a lot of the times you got this Bermuda or bluegrass rough around the greens. So a lot of them are explosion shots. So I felt like the closer you got to the hole, the more European it became. And I did a function with Justin Leonard Thursday night, and folks asked him, so what's the key? And he goes, you want to win a Ryder Cup? You just have to putt. And that's where the Americans fell down time and time again over there.
Yeah, it was pretty jarring, especially, Friday specifically. It didn't seem like it felt like there was a lid on the cup for the US side, KP. And it also felt like something we talked about a lot. There was just absolutely no juice for those guys. So does that fall on the captaincy? Does that fall on lack of a leader out, in the locker room? I mean, what else was one of the reasons that the American team never got this thing in gear?
Yeah, the Data Golf, and maybe you've put something out on this too, Rick. I haven't seen. I don't think you haven't sent out a newsletter this week, have you?
No, I have not. No newsletter from old Rick this week.
Data Golf put out a newsletter this week that was talking about basically Europe destroyed the Americans off the tee. Like, they were so, and we saw this on the first hole, right? Like, if you were at the first hole, almost every match, it seemed like, this is not actually true, but if you're watching it, almost every match, it seemed like the Americans were going right off the tee. How many times were they in the right rough off the tee, and the Europeans would just bang one down the middle, and they won the first hole like an overwhelming amount of the time. And that to me was emblematic of the entire week, just that they drove it better. But I think the bigger question is, why do the European players seem to play above their sort of baseline, and the Americans play below? And we see this even in let's take Hovland and Scheffler, both like two of the probably 4 best players in the world. Scheffler way below his baseline, and Hovland, as good as he is, I think played like above it. Like, his driving numbers last week were a joke. And so you have to ask the question, why is that? Like, why does that happen? And buddy, like, up close, I haven't been up close at a European Ryder Cup yet. I am all in on the, and it sounds stupid, and I realize it, I'm all in on the culture thing. Like, those guys just, like, they understand why they're at the Ryder Cup. They understand what the Ryder Cup is. Their culture, their 30, 40 years worth of culture And Rom had a quote on this on Sunday. He said, listen, when we enter the room on Monday, we forget about who we were and we forget about who we're going to be. And there could not be a more perfect summation of the European Ryder Cup culture. And I think when that happens, everybody just is bonded together in a way that it elevates Nikolai Højgaard to where he thinks he's Rory. He thinks he's like Rory McIlroy during the Ryder Cup. He makes 7 birdies on Friday in 4-ball. It elevates a Bob McIntyre. It elevates all these guys. And I'm just like, you can't measure it. It's impossible to like have data on. I could not be more in on it, because I think the point of it is not necessarily to like sing songs around the campfire, but to like encourage one another to be better than your baseline, than you otherwise would be. Do you, as a data guy, am I crazy? Is this stupid? You saw it up close. It's like, I don't know how to not believe in this.
Yes. So, right. I think the Ryder Cup is like lives outside of the data world.
For sure. Yeah.
It's just because, one, it is a very small, 3 days where matches don't necessarily go all 18 holes and guys don't even necessarily hit all the shots, right? Just from a data perspective, it is a very small and noisy sample size. From a culture perspective, Mark, I think I'm with Kyle that like this is all culture. Where I was sitting in the media center was with a lot of international press. The Italian guys were here, and the Sweden was over here, and the UK was here, and they were just like pointing out these little things throughout the event that I was like, this is stupid, this is stupid, this is stupid. But like then you start adding it up and seeing what happens. Like, for example, Max Homa walks to the first tee from the driving range without Brian Harman on Friday, and someone was like, "What is he doing?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, why wouldn't he wait for him? Why wouldn't they go through there together? Every European pairing to a man is coming out arm in arm out onto the first tee, and just like they would point out all these little things that they thought were crazy that the Americans weren't doing culture wise, and that the Europeans were doing every single time.
Yes. And the Ryder Cup is largely a couples thing. Yes, there are 12 points on a Sunday, and that's what there's 28 points on offer. But the first 2 days, which sets up the final result, is the lion's share of the event. And year in and year out, the Euros do very well in that because of that culture that you and Kyle speak of. And the group I was with, PepsiCo, they had a chalet on the first tee. So we saw all this first tee action, and to a couple, every single one of the Euros, when they stood for their official picture, they were basically arm in arm, hugging each other, and the Americans were just kind of standing there. So yes, there is something that's bred. And from everyone I've spoken to, from Jose Maria Lizarraga, who Luke Donald was a masterclass to put him on the team as an assistant captain, he basically learned from Seve. And Seve was the guy alongside Feldo. There's a picture of it over there. You can see the Americans look downright downcast over there.
This picture could not be more indicative of the week.
The last 50 years. I mean, this explains the Ryder Cup right here.
And so Jose Maria learns from. Sorry, Rick. And so Jose Maria learns from Seve, and he mentioned to me once, he's like, the first time he played with Seve, he was as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. And the next thing, he's like, Seve's got his arm around me and he's geeing me up and he's telling me, you got this. And then there was one situation where it was alternate shot and Seve said, you tee off the first hole first. And Jose Maria's like, well, I can't, I'm too nervous. He was a rookie. And Seve's like, you got this. And so he'd lift him up. And that's where that parity, maybe to what Kyle was describing, becomes a thing. And when you walked into the grounds, you guys saw it, I'm sure, maybe it sort of went amiss. When you went under that player walkway, that whole blue wall had the names of every previous European Ryder Cupper on there. And so there's this history that's created, and you're playing for something larger than self. And then obviously the crowd have a big say-so in this. And as soon as the Cantlay stuff came out, every hole you turned to, there were thousands of European fans waving a cap around all over the place. just to kind of drop the needle a little bit more, because it's match play, it's gladiatorial, it's finding a way, and they just find that way that's beyond the data, and it's self-belief, it's belief in each other, and trust in each other too. You know, when you look at your partner, you're like, you got this, man. I got you. That's worth a whole lot. Think of Hatton over there. When you got someone as big and imposing as a John Rahm and going, I got you, Tyrrell, or you got this. That says a lot when the pressure is so high.
So that picture, if you're only listening, is the picture, which is Xander and Cantlay looking down and downtrodden on the first tee, while Tyrrell Hatton and John Rahm are arm in arm. It basically sums up, as Kyle says, decades of Ryder Cup history. KP, to continue to dive into this, I was in both team rooms on Monday, and both are obviously very nice facilities, right? The United States, it's great. They have huge lockers. They've got an awesome dining area, a great gym, whatever. They're all top-notch facilities, but the European side was full of a lot of these kind of like, if you know, or like these cultural statements. Hey, we're a team. There's a big Sevi thing. This is Team Europe. They have the list of the 12 and their new numbers, right? Because they count how many guys have ever played for Team Europe in a Ryder Cup, and each guy knows what number they are on that list. And even to the detail of, behind the Team Europe crest on their chest, you flip that around on the inside where no one but these guys know it, is that Sevi Ballesteros logo. I mean, they just do not miss an opportunity to motivate, to start rowing in the same direction. They're telling a story and everyone's buying into it.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing I can say to that that's going to explain it better than what you just said. By the way, I needed you in the team rooms on like Saturday night when Rory was screaming and Cantlay was, which, by the way, I mean, we can get into this, but like the US needing a tweet about a hat to get fired up and I'm not saying that they don't care. And I actually think, Rick, that the US culture has gotten better. Like I mean, I don't know that it could get worse right after like 2014, but I think they're moving in the right direction, but it takes time, right? It takes a long time to build into what you see with the European team. And I ran into a player on Sunday after, like, I wrote about this on Sunday night, but between the 18th green and they were going to get the trophy. And this player was hollering about how, like, hey, 35 years, they still just think we're overachieving, right? They still just think we're overachieving. And it's like, the implication is like, we understand how to do all this. And it doesn't mean I got a lot of sort of reaction from people that was like, well, they never win in the United States. Well, first of all, they do, right? And second of all, winning on the road is extremely difficult. And third, the Euros are usually the worst team of the two. They usually have the overall worst players. So not only are they winning on the road, which the US is not, but they're also winning as the underdog. I think the US has been the favorite in the last 4 Ryder Cups, and they're 2-2, right? And so I just, again, like, I am having seen it up close, having seen the singing and the dancing, like there's just an inhibition there that I think the only thing they care about throughout that week, Rick, is how encouraged each other feels from their personal, like from the rest of the team. And if you watch the US body language, if you watch them play together, if you look at that picture of Cantlay and Xander, again, is it getting better? Absolutely. I thought Scheffler crying in the middle of Saturday was like a really meaningful moment, and he got made fun of. And I think you're stupid if you're making fun of that. But the Euros have such an advantage when it comes to culture that, yeah, it doesn't mean you're going to win every time, because sometimes you're going to get out talented, you're going to get outplayed or whatever, but it does give you a shot. And I was sold a bill of goods at Whistling Straits, Rick. I don't think the US is ever winning in Europe for the net. I don't know what it would take for me to ever pick the US to win in Europe again.
Kyle, that's a really good call, because as you were saying this, I wanted to add the other side of the coin, in my opinion. And I thought there was an air of overconfidence to the United States team too, because of what happened at Whistling Straits. and because of how everyone's sort of been playing. Because I thought it was almost a slap in the Euros face that a lion's share of the Americans would come into this very important event, as far as the Europeans are concerned, hardly having played. There was two guys, Max and JT, I think that might be it, who played competitively prior to the Ryder Cup. And that's a big deal, where the Europeans go to arguably their second biggest event in the BMW Championship at Wentworth, and they're all there, and they're all playing under pressure, and they're all together, where the US sort of flew out from Atlanta together, not even all of them, because Brooks wasn't on the flight. And then they show up, they're like, okay, we're going to dust the floor with these guys. I think that was locker bulletin board material for the Euros as well. So, coupled the match play, the culture, the people, the fans, you got to play before the time. You can't practice at your home driving range and be prepared for the pressure that is represented by that first tee. And then having to hold a 5-footer on the 15th hole to keep your match alive, not just against another couple, but against an entire continent of people. You can't do it. So I feel like they should have played before the time.
I think the rebuttal to that is they didn't really play leading into 2021, the Whistling Straits, right? But
they're playing in front of Americans there.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know. And maybe it takes a day or two to kind of get going when you haven't played like that. Rick,
that's like 70% now 70% of the Ryder Cup is gone after a day or two of you trying to get going.
Totally. And it feels go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just going to say it was 4-0 after the first morning.
Yeah.
And that was ostensibly the difference, because what was the final result was 5, right? 5 points difference.
I thought that, a couple things. One, you can't go 3-19-2 in foursomes over the last since 2014 in Europe. 3-19-2 and it feels like freaking magic. Like, it feels like the Europeans are doing a magic trick. And that's sort of what I'm talking about. It's like the intangibles, that stuff does feel like magic a lot of times, because you're like, this is inexplicable. Like, I do not know how to explain like how Victor Hovland Rahm hit the stick like 5 times on Friday. And you're like, what the hell, man? Like, how does this happen? I know he's great, but he was like fine in the playoffs. He was okay the second half of the season. And then all of a sudden he's hitting the stick from everywhere but the Trevi Fountain, And I don't like that. I thought they lost the Ryder Cup, Rick, on Friday afternoon. When the Europeans got 1.5 points out of those last 3 matches, or 3 of those 4 that the US was up in all of them, I thought that was kind of like, yeah, you're not. You could come back from this, but it's going to be like a miracle. And it got a little interesting on Sunday. I mean, it was fun for like 45 minutes, but then it was just like, yeah, we have to win all these, and that can't happen.
I want to say to that Friday afternoon, because that is a good call there, because it appeared like there was a little momentum shift, and you guys were out there on the golf course, I'm sure, where I was taking tours of people around, and the vibe did get quieter. But all it took was one birdie by somebody on the European team, and then the crowds lit up again. And I feel like the crowds carried the Euros to those late halves. And then you do something special. Like, I feel like almost the Ryder Cup was won when Justin Rose made that curling 10-footer on Saturday, or was that Friday, for a 0.5 point on the final hole. And they'd been down the whole time. And it just gets me to thinking, this is in Rome. When we get to Bethpage Black in 2 years' time, the roles are going to be completely reversed, because you're going to have a rabid fandom from New York and everywhere else that are just going to go bananas. And there's going to be all sorts going on. So I would strongly right now, looking at what happened and just seeing how the crowd could influence the thing. Now the US could shut the crowd down. Now when we get to the States, you're going to have the roles reversed. And I'm keen to see how this European team will face up to that. I really am.
Yeah, Bethpage is setting up to be raucous, to say the least. We're going to continue this conversation, see if we can figure out what's going wrong with the Americans, what they can learn from the European side, and talk a little bit of the quotes that have come out in the past couple of days. But first, we're going to take a quick break and hear a word from our partners.
When you need your sports news anywhere,
we've got breaking news to bring you.
Then get your sports anytime you want them. Big trade news overnight to discuss.
Because we know you need sports all the time.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
A legend adds to their legacy.
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
CBS Sports HQ, anywhere, anytime, all the time.
And we're back. Okay, KP, just broad question. We've been talking a lot about culture here. What is the American culture?
well, I think it's a great question, and I think one thing I've been thinking a lot about this week is, can you, like, if you're the American team, should your play be to try and replicate what the Europeans have done? Because as a outsider, I'm obsessed with it. I think the European culture is very aspirational, but I don't know that it even works on the American. I don't know if that's the path forward for them to build for the next 20 or 30 years. And, they've talked a lot about, well, just let us do our own thing that week. Let us take our naps and have our workouts and like all that stuff. And you're like, well, is that doesn't seem like a culture. That seems more like a sort of a plan, like a weekly plan or whatever. I don't know. I honestly, like, I do think they're headed in the right direction. I think guys like Scheffler, Spieth, JT, they've grown up like caring deeply about the Ryder Cup in ways that the generation before them did not. And so it takes a long time, I think, and this is where I sort of net out on it. I think it takes a long time to build a culture. Remember how the Patriots used to take on like Antonio Brown, and you're like, well, the Patriots can absorb an Antonio Brown because their culture is such that it doesn't, he's not bigger than the culture. That's how the Euros are. Like, they can bring in, Sergio Garcia is like one of the more unlikable players in the world outside of the Ryder Cup. And then he gets inside the Ryder Cup and you're like, oh, well, he's actually like beloved, And I don't think the American culture is there yet, because as we saw this week, you got all the Cantlay stuff going on, and it rose above like their sort of team culture and atmosphere. So I'd love your opinion. Like, should they just try and replicate what the Europeans do? Should they try to kind of differentiate a little bit? Where do you land on that?
No, I think it'll be hard to. I think there's also a lot of. So the other thing that I learned this week is, the international media, they love to get an American's opinion on things.
Yes.
Right. And it is interesting how they view a Ryder Cup and how we view a Ryder Cup. And I do think, along with a lot of the other great motivating components and cultural things that the Europeans have put in place, there is this natural desire to beat America, right? There's this natural desire to say, we're the underdog. We know it. We're from 9 different countries. We're not, they think they're better than us. Everybody thinks they're better than us. We're going to go and we're going to beat America. And that is not that, whatever percentage of the foundation of the culture, like, that's a percentage of it. And it's going to be hard to kind of take that and say, hey, we're the Americans, let's go beat up on Europe. I don't think you're going to get a rallying cry around that. What I do think would be interesting, and I think it's hard to build a culture where, you're essentially getting a new captain every 2 years, right? I mean, imagine if the Patriots had Bill Belichick for 2 years and then, we're going to go get, like, it's hard to roll that over time and time again, which is why you generally see the vice captains get funneled in and things like that. But I truly, Mark, and I, would love to hear from you on this. Like, if I really wanted to build a culture, I would find my guy and have him there for a long time. I'd get my Greg Popovich. I'd get my Bill Belichick. I'd get my somebody who can lead this into the future and be bigger than just this 2 years. And before you reply to that, unmute yourself.
I couldn't agree more. I was this whole thing with Europe started with Tony Jacklin, who started the whole "we're the underdogs" thing, and this is sort of be a past or before a lot of folks' time, where, when the Americans would come to play Europe, it was all pomp and circumstance. And the European tour had so little money that when they went to play in the States, they were all flying on their own dime. They didn't have uniforms and stuff. And Jacklin brought in the cashmere. He brought in, we good enough, we're going to fly on the Concorde, but we still the underdogs kind of thing. And then he basically bred a Bernard Gallagher, who was an assistant captain for a long time. Gallagher then took over the role. And so it went down the way. And you could see that influence still, the thread there is still through Luke Donald. But I would say, as far as culture goes, I don't think the Americans can replicate the culture. And the reason being is because bar Rory and John Rahm, maybe one or two others, the private jet travelers, I want to say, the European tour, you guys have been there. It's hard to travel through Europe. The airports are not as grandiose as the States. So you fly to a place, then you're on a bus carriage to somewhere, and it takes 45 minutes to 2 hours to get to a course. So all these guys, when you're on the European tour, are traveling together. And that's where these friendships, these connections are forged, not just in practice rounds, not in the odd private jet trip to Valhalla to play a media day. That's just not how it works. So this whole thing about Europe is a lot of them travel together, wives at home, they're in the same plane or the same bus carriage, and they're these relationships that are built before the time. And you can see that because these things have been galvanized over lots and lots of experiences, not just get together on 2 weeks prior and go to Italy and play a little golf and then show up on Monday morning and all of a sudden we got the world figured out. Kyle said it right. Sometimes you just can't out-talent somebody. And that's what the Americans were sort of relying on. So I'm not sure where their culture comes from, but I would, I watched it in my household with the President's Cup, where the internationals were wildly outmanned in terms of the world rankings. But Trevor got this team together monthly for 2 months before, or for 2 years, I should say, before the President's Cup, for a dinner, got them together for practice rounds. When I saw, I'll never forget at Hilton Head, at the RBC, the year of the President's Cup, there was a practice round. And at that stage, Cameron Smith was part of it. And there was Waco Neiman and a few of them. They all already had their international team towels on their bag, and they were playing practice rounds together. So this thing was built years before the event, because it's not like plug and play. I don't care how good you are, because again, it's match play, which is different, and you're playing with a guy at your side. It's not just you on your own ball.
Rick, one thing that I think is really contrasting with the two teams, and I think this is where the Americans can really grow a lot over the next 15, 20 years, is if you look at the top players on each side, they have very different attitudes toward this whole thing. And this has been an American problem for a long time. Like Tiger and Phil, obviously two of the best ever, but they never really, especially the early parts of their career, didn't really like fully buy into like the Ryder Cup, like we know it, and Europe has always had that. Like think about like Rahm and Rory, and again, I go back to, I'm going to think about that Rahm quote forever of just like, hey, when we get in the room, we forget about who we are and also who what we're going to be. Like it's almost like a self-forgetfulness that I think is so, like that quote, I think is telling, like it explains everything you need to know about the entire thing. And those guys, like, they don't care if they look like fools throughout the week. They don't care if they're completely uninhibited from like just screaming and yelling and getting their teammates going. And that's a pretty rare thing for a global star at the level that Rahm and Rory are at to be like, and you flip it around and look at the American side, and it's like Cantlay and Xander are 2 or 3 best players. And we just showed the picture of them, and they come out looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. And you get all these reports that come out that Cantlay's talking behind the scenes about like, well, we need to be paid, and Xander won't sign the agreement to be in the Ryder Cup, almost got kicked off the team. And you're like, what are we doing? Like, if these are your sort of best players, like your team leaders. And I think the Americans, and this was why I was so vocal about JT being on the team. You have to have some guys that are like, you know what, this actually is cool to care about the Ryder Cup. and they have to pass it down to the best players of the next generation. Justin Rose or Rory, one of those two, said on Sunday, "Hey, we're just like the keepers of the Euro uniform to hand it down to the next generation." That attitude does not exist on the American side because its leaders have never really entered into it. And I think you're getting close to it. Like JT's like sort of there, and I think Scotty Scheffler wants to be there, but he has a hard time because it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to be vulnerable, to show that you care, all that different stuff. But I think unless you like Cantlay and Xander, that ain't it. You know, like your top guys have to be leaders that like care, that aren't afraid to care, and that pass that down to the next generation.
It's fragile is what it is, Mark. You know, the American side, the American culture is fragile, and it goes in both directions, right? I mean, Kyle mentioned it earlier. If it takes a tweet from Jamie Weir to get you fired up on Saturday night, you have problems. And the fact that, you know, one guy whose dad might not want, I'm talking about Xander's dad, who might not want, you know, Netflix in the room or might want to get paid more or whatever, if that can kind of throw barbs into your culture, like it's super fragile. Like that stuff should not be able to penetrate. Yet here it is, not only penetrating, but likely being a significant thing.
Yeah, it's an odd situation to be in, and I just think personally, I wouldn't want to be in the next task force room right now, because to our conversation, which we're going around the table, I'm sort of hearing the same thread all the time. And I'm not so sure if calmer heads could prevail and come up with anything for the next time. I think the lone hope is that, again, it's back in the United States. Because if it continues like this, because I honestly believe, and I experienced it when I was asked to opine on the thing, I'm like, I feel like the crowd is going to make a difference. I really do. And the crowd do make a difference. So as far as culture goes, to what we've been talking about, I feel like it's next to impossible for the Americans to pick up, because they play such an individual game. And the more they spend time together, fine. But it's finding that pride in the logo on your chest, which I find curious, because everyone on that team, they will all bleed for whatever college they've gone to, because they've spent 4 years there, immersed in the college culture. But then when it comes to representing your country, which is the highest honor, I find it unbelievable that there aren't more folks like a JT or someone that looks like they are going to, like Max Homer to me. I was so impressed with him. He looked like he was going to run through a wall, and it didn't matter who he faced up to. He was up for it because of what was on his chest and on the front of his hat, not in the bank account, not on the Netflix thing. I mean, for Pete's sake, all of these guys on the Netflix deal, that's all about making more money. There are not very many Europeans doing those shows, you know. So again, I feel like the culture is going to be hard, but it's going to start with custodians, to what Kyle says. And I'm just not sure who they're going to be. I really am not. I think it starts with the captaincy, and it's got to stay with somebody for a while. And they're going to start to talk about this thing more than just a few weeks out, where now we're all fighting about who's going to make the team and disagreeing on stuff. This is going to start way, way, way before Bethpage Black. But again, like I say, mark my words down, New York City Ryder Cup is going to be off the charts. And I right now had the advantage to the Americans, even though Europeans looked unbeatable last week.
I think the captaincy is hard because it's very difficult. It almost needs somebody. It almost needs to be somebody that's like an outsider in some ways to sort of.
Or KP, I mean, Zach Johnson, and it's not his own fault, is like still a full-time player. Like, what are we like? Why does that need to be a guy? Why?
Yeah, but so is Luke Donald, right?
Guys, this is easy. This is really easy. There's one guy who needs this job. He did the President's Cup in Australia, brought that team back. They were way against the ropes against everything else. There's one dude that deserves this job. One dude, when he gets up in the locker room and says, "You boys, it's on us now," that folks will go, "Yes, amen, sir." The rest of the people are like, "Zach's a great guy." But when Tiger Woods speaks, all of this generation listen. There's one guy who needs to be the captain.
Yeah, I really couldn't disagree more with that, just because Tiger is the one that I feel like was part of the problem all along. Like Tiger could have, over the last 20 years, built an extraordinary culture on the American side, right? He could have really like leaned in and like think about like how many guys he could have empowered and brought along, and like it could really be thriving, and he didn't do it. And there are reasons for that. And he was always very private and individualistic. And I just don't know that like with Tiger, like what I do agree with Mark is I think Tiger for one Ryder Cup would be a very good captain. So I'm not disagreeing with that part. I think he would be, as we saw at the President's Cup, I think he'd be good. I just don't know if that's the long-term like culture builder that you're getting at or that you want if you're the American side.
Tiger Woods is a different guy now to the Tiger Woods that was playing on the Ryder Cup. I don't think those comparing apples and oranges. Tiger Woods now is sort of the magnanimous elder statesman of the PGA Tour and a mentor to a number of the youngsters, Justin Thomas most notably. So I feel like the guy now is the guy for the job. Now, if you'd asked me this a few years ago, I would have said, heck no. You know, when you're disagreeing with players like a Phil Mickelson and such, you can't have that in the team room. But right now, that's not who Tiger Woods is. You know, beyond that, I couldn't see. Look, Steve Stricker was very good. Davis Love has been really good too. But you need a real guy that's going to challenge the guys to stand up and get some pride in who they are and who they're representing.
And I think what you're getting at is a little bit part of the problem that I see, which if there's only one guy that can, that those guys will like fully buy into and listen to, then you have, and I'm not saying this about any one person, but I think you have some like ego problem, or like they don't check their ego or like themselves at the door, like Rom was talking about. And being the European Ryder Cup captain it's not easy. Obviously, like it's really difficult just to figure all that stuff out and be detailed and know when to believe the numbers and when to go with your gut, all those different things. But you have like complete buy-in from your stars and from like that sort of group of players that you can't really trust that on the American side. I think we've seen that over the last 10 years now.
Could we also just for a second, because as far as, in my opinion, what I got to see, I just thought the US team was roundly outplayed. They really were from in the practice rounds, just the way the teams bonded, but that's beside the point. But then when Friday morning rolled around, from the very first hole, it was the European ascendancy. Now, I've handed some of the credit to the fans, the 13th man, if you will, and one or two other cultural things, which I agree wholeheartedly. But the Euros just played well. The Americans didn't play well whatsoever. You referenced the data golf thing off the tee. That is largely where they thrive. But no one was really there. And I keep on gravitating back to the fact that they didn't have much competition coming in, but they just were outplayed. That's as simple as that.
All right, we are going to put a bow on this with probably one more topic or so, but we are going to do it after a quick word from our partners.
Wake up to football highlights and news from around the world with the one and only Morning Footy team.
Rise and shine, football fans. Welcome to Morning Footy.
Start your all-day football craze with Morning Footy, part of the all-new Golazo Network.
And we're back. All right, gents. Well, since the last time we spoke, specifically on Monday, the drip started to come out. Stephen Schauffele, Xander's dad, on record, basically opining about why, I don't know, I guess it was kind of all over the place, KP, why these guys should be paid, or why they should be able to at least look at the books, or why they should come up with an agreement on where the money is going. And it basically revealed that even as of a few weeks out, Xander's place on this US Ryder Cup team was in jeopardy because he had not committed to signing the player agreement.
Can you imagine just for a second, imagine Tommy Fleetwood or Tyrrell Hatton or I don't know, Justin Rose a couple weeks out from the Ryder Cup being like, I don't know if I'm going to be there. Can you imagine that happening?
Yeah.
It's absurd. Right. And listen, like Well, I didn't see this coming. I don't know if any of us did, but the Ryder Cup this year became a lot about like, should these guys be paid? And you're like, damn, like the one thing that I had that I didn't think we were going to talk about that. Now we're still talking about it, you know? And like, I don't know. I think that there's a conversation to be had about Ryder Cup makes a lot of money, right? It makes 9 figures of money. That's a lot of money. I think there's a conversation to be had about like funneling some of that to the people that are participating in it, that are putting on the show. But man, like the self-importance of different camps on the US side, it's like, I don't know, man, like the Ryder Cup's going to be sweet whether you play in it or not. And just this like self-important, like, no, I'm the star, I'm the show, I'm the man. And I get that it didn't come directly from a player, but I'm sorry, but like you're responsible as the player for that.
You are responsible, yes. If you don't, like, listen, I don't hear from a lot of dads on the PGA Tour. I don't hear from a lot of agents or managers, right? If the player doesn't want something being like, there are ways to handle that. Mark, I think KP's right in the sense that if Patrick Cantlay and Xander Schauffele were replaced with Keegan Bradley and Cam Young, the Ryder Cup still would have been awesome.
Probably would have been better.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, Keegan Bradley wouldn't have made a big deal like that. Lucas Glover certainly would have. You know, Lucas Glover would have given his left arm to be on the Ryder Cup team. And the truth is, the players do get money. They just don't get money for their own bank accounts.
Right.
Because they all get $200,000 to give to their charities, so they look like heroes. And then let's not forget, too, that some of this money is channeled to the PGA Tour, which is deposited straight into their retirement annuities, which are growing like by the minute. They're going to have so much money down the track. It's just the instant gratification of it all. There's not a thing. So they are benefiting out of this thing significantly. And then, and I've said this more than once, all of these guys, if they got an agent who's worth any salt, have some clause in their Titleist agreement, whatever that says, representative teams, you get a bonus. So let me tell you what, the fact that they were in a US uniform, they were making money from all their sponsors as well. So they were getting plenty. They were getting plenty.
And you know what? Who wants to partner with Max Homa after the week he had? Anybody that's associated with the Ryder Cup, right? Absolutely. So it's just short-sighted, you know, not short-sighted, but short-sighted in a way that the Europeans are just like not like they take the long view, and it just was. It was very emblematic of what I think is, again, part of the. And we overstate this when America loses. Like, oh, the problem. What's the problem? Like, they're still they rolled at Whistling Straits. They're probably going to win at Bethpage. I don't know that there's like a massive problem, but man, they're pretty hard to root for. Like, they're pretty unlikable as a team. You know, like that is pretty clear now, and it's been clear, but it's even more clear now. And so I think that matters. And yeah, like, listen, like I think Bethpage is going to be fascinating, Mark. Like, I think it's going to be so interesting because you get who knows who's going to be on either of those teams, but you get Rory on Sunday night saying, hey, we're going to win at Bethpage. And you're like, hell yeah. Like, that's what I want to talk about for the next 2 years. And the reality for the Europeans is they took a bad team to Hazeltine. That team was not good. I just looked at the Danny Willett was the third best player on that team. That's not good. That's a problem. The reality at Whistling Straits is they kind of just had one superstar playing well. Rory wasn't playing great. Hovland wasn't who he is now. So can you have this convergence of like, yeah, your coach, we know your culture is going to be great. It's going to be awesome. Your captain's going to be good. Like, all that's kind of just, you know, set in stone, but can you get everything else going in the right direction to where Rory, Rahm, Hovland, you know, Fleetwood, maybe Ludwig, like all these guys are playing great going in. And then you start to if you get a European win on the road, then it's like, okay, then it is a problem for the Americans.
Yeah.
Like it's an issue right now, but then it's like a Task Force 2 type problem where you're like, what are we going to do about the future?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, Rick, we're in the news cycle post Ryder Cup now, and everyone's armchair quarterbacking the thing. Look, it was an embarrassing loss for the Americans because people can say that there was a moment on Sunday where it was possible. It was possible. It's also possible that I could go out and do flick-flacks outside, but it's not going to happen. So I think there's just a lot of reaction to it because it was a disappointing loss. And if I was on the American team, I'd be scarred and sort of aggravated and pissed off right now. But I feel like, everyone's going to forget this in a little while and roll around Bethpage. It could be a different thing. I would, alongside Kyle, I'd love to see this team, this Euro team, perhaps with the addition of one or two other young stars that are coming through. I think they could hold their own. But playing in New York against New York fans, that is, I've seen them boo Americans when we did a PGA championship there. So it's going to be raucous and really nasty to play in.
That's where your culture comes in, though, right? Like that's where it can really push back against. Because you're right, it's being on the road is hard, and that was one of my takeaways last week, Rick. Is it's very difficult to. You're nervous in any Ryder Cup or team event. It's hard. But man, those guys are not conditioned to like have 40,000 people yelling at them, not for them, but at them. Like that's a different thing. And it never happens in golf, right? It happens in other sports all the time because you play on the road against some fans' home team a lot, but it never happens in golf. And it's jarring. Like it's jarring to, as a fan, as a media member, as a player, anything. It's very different. And I think that's where the culture can like come in and kind of absorb some of that when you're on the road.
Yeah, and I would add to that too. It just sort of came to me because at the top of the show, you guys were talking about your American experience in Rome. And the previous Ryder Cup abroad was in Paris. These are two age-old cities, right, that are they ooze culture and they ooze history and this sort of thing. For the Americans to go over there is a whole lot harder than for some of the Euros who come and stay in the United States and are assimilated and they're used to what the hotel rooms are like and what the transport's like and what the food's like, that sort of thing. For the Americans going over to Rome, I mean, that was an eye popper. It's an eye popper for anyone because the place is just so different. So that has something to do with it as well, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's my big takeaway is, Kyle, as you kind of mentioned, golf is generally played exclusively on a neutral site with generally neutral fans. Yes, there are guys who get more support than others, but to get a negative reaction or clearly you not being the guy from everyone it's jarring is a very good word. So with that, I'll just final thoughts here. What will you remember from Rome? What is something that have you thought about more than you should over the last we'll start with you.
Oh gosh, there's too many. I was with Max Homa's group on Sunday, and when he got up and down to keep it alive, that was extraordinary. Like that was like, and it sounds dumb because they got kind of smoked at the end, but that was kind of like once in a lifetime type stuff. To like keep the Ryder Cup alive, you have to get up and down from a really not great spot, and he did it. And if he doesn't do it, the Ryder Cup's over. Like that's incredible. But I think probably the scene I'll remember most is coming up 16 on Saturday night or Saturday afternoon. There was different groups going through there and just walking with those groups down into that. I mean, you played 16, so it's obviously down and to the right. And everybody's just screaming at Cantlay and singing at him, and the sun was setting kind of in the background, and you're just like, this is crazy to like to be at a Ryder Cup in Italy of all places, and to get to experience that thing that you very rarely get to experience, once every 2 years or once every 4 years for the home team. that to me was like the most poignant, special moment of the entire event. There was nothing that actually happened. Like there was no like great shot or anything like that, but just that walk from 16 tee box to 16 green as the players are going and as everybody's kind of moving toward the end of Saturday night, that was a pretty sweet moment. That and Rory screaming in the parking lot was up there too. we didn't even talk about it.
Listen, that's old news by this point, right?
I know.
That's good. All right, Mark, what will you remember most from this Ryder Cup?
Well, I'm keen to hear yours because you're Italian sojourn. But for me, I had three, and they sort of tickled my sensibilities. And one was the sentimental sap in me. The other one was the golf coach, and the other one was the competitor. So from the competitor's point of view, I'm still mortified that Ricky Fowler would concede that putt to Tommy Fleetwood on Sunday afternoon for the guaranteed half in the cup. That to me, that is still keeping me awake at night. The romantic in me, I mean, remember walking around a golf course and looking over and seeing a castle with the Italian flag on that Galileo lived in and researched in, for Pete's sake. That's ridiculous. And we were fortunate to meet Lavinia Biagiotti, who's from the family who owned that place. Her mom, Lauren, was the owner of a fashion house. And it was her vision to bring a Ryder Cup to Italy. And then her mom fell ill during COVID, passed away, and Lavinia took up the torch. And they were building the golf course then. And she was seeding fairways and mowing fairways and stuff. This is like a fashion icon, right? To show the passion about bringing this event to Rome. And then just from a coach's standpoint, Victor Hovland, I saw something out of him. It was one of the rounds. It might have been Saturday because he played all of them. But he walked on the tee. Folks were singing the Victor Hovland do-do-do song, and it was all fun. And he gets over there and makes a practice swing, and everyone does the practice swing sound. And then he goes, come, lift it up. And the folks start going bananas, right? And then they settle down, and we had a close-up that they went into his face. And you could see him close his eyes, take a couple deep breaths, and he got over the ball and just freaking lashed this thing straight down the fairway. And when I saw that happen, I'm like, this boy, he's got the gift in his hands and his feet, but he's got it here and he's got it over there to be able to settle down the mayhem inside of his mind. And the heart rate must have been elevated and the adrenaline, all your nerve endings are like heightened. And he could slow himself down to absolutely pin one down the fairway. And I was like, geez, if I was a believer before, Victor Hovland is legit. And so that was kind of my three takeaways.
Yeah, real quick sorry, Rick, real quick on Hovland. Like, I don't know how it's going to go for him, but legitimate Ryder Cup legend potential. He could get hurt. A lot of things can happen, but as of right now, you're like, okay, this could be like, the next Sergio, whoever you want to like throw in there. I'm happy to throw Hovland back in there also.
Hey, Rick, before you go, Joe Mayo texted me Sunday night, basically going, legitimately, my guy's arguably the best golfer in the world right now.
He is.
That was it. Yeah.
He told me that at Riviera, and Victor wasn't playing that well. They are just that team. They're ready to be number one in the world.
I tweeted it on Saturday night when he made, or Friday. I guess it was Friday night when he made that putt on 18. He's the best player in the world right now.
I just think my takeaways are that, throw anything else out the window. There is nothing like a Ryder Cup. There's nothing like a Ryder Cup on the road. It feels different. It plays different. It's just whatever you think is going to happen, throw it out the window because there's nothing like this in golf. And then obviously, I mean, to be able to play the course on Monday, I cannot describe how, I don't know how these guys do anything. I mean, the rough is so nasty. It is impossible to find a golf ball if you're not playing out of the fairway. We did not play it from the Ryder Cup tees, obviously, and it is such a hard golf course. I can't even fathom how good these guys are.
Here's a rebuttal to that. You shot what, 82?
82.
You would have beaten. You would have beaten Brooks and Scheffler in their foursomes. Maybe by a lot.
It's wild.
Like 9-7 is embarrassing, man. Oh my goodness, that's horrible.
My thing that I'll remember might be JT saying 9-7.
Yeah.
That is bad.
I dropped back to that group because I was there when they closed it out on 11, and I mean the fans knew it, man. They were like, "This is about to be historic." Like just step on their throat. We know it's coming, and then they did the Viking clap, and the whole thing was just over. It was over.
So it's the year I've been singing, and this isn't everybody's been tweeting this, but I've been singing the European songs in my head. My kids are singing them. It's the USA is terrified, Europe's on fire is a banger.
All right, gents. Well, listen, we will discuss this as we tend to do, because whoever wins Sanderson Farms, I'm sure we will have them headed to the Ryder Cup.
President's Cup. President's Cup.
Right. That's how this whole thing works. So a pleasure as usual. I'm glad we were able to debrief here a little bit. Producer Josh does all the hard work behind the scenes. Mark Immelman available online at Mark_Immelman, Kyle Porter at Kyle Porter CBS. And you can find me at Rick Run Good. This has been The First Cut. We'll catch you next time.